Among the Western coalition providing aid to Ukraine, there is perhaps no greater European partner than Germany. While countries like Poland and the UK have donated more military aid to Ukraine, Germany maintains a special position in the European community that's vital for the overall health of the EU and the NATO alliance. Because of Germany's strategic position, Russia has been keen to do everything it can to sow the seeds of dissent within Germany. Let's take a look at some of Russia's so far unsuccessful plans to kill German support for Ukraine. Before getting into the details of how Russia has tried to bully and undermine Germany into submission, it's important to note why Germany has been the primary target for Russian interference outside of Ukraine. Since the end of World War II, Germany has been one of the main European supporters of peaceful conclusions to conflicts worldwide and has continued to hold this stance for the conflict in Ukraine. Additionally, arguably as a way for the German public to atone for its sins in the war, the German government treats all European partners equally no matter their size. Because of this, the German government is seen as a big brother for all of Europe, especially poorer and smaller Eastern European and Baltic countries that have been ignored by Western Europe in the past. Because of this unique position, Germany is a vital partner in European affairs, since they'll advocate for countries like Latvia and Lithuania just as much as they do for Italy and France. But it's not just their position as a great mediator that Russia's worried about, it's also their economy. With an economy valued at over 3.3 trillion euros, Germany is the largest economy in mainland Europe, and it's also the most populated country in the EU, boasting over 83 million people. These two factors combined give Germany a massive edge in manufacturing and technology, which has been a mainstay of the German economy for decades. In fact, the German economy is so strong that Germany ranks third in the world in the number of exported goods it produces. Because of all these factors, though, Germany's defense industrial base is rather small because of decades of public policy keeping it that way. It would be very easy for Germany to scale up its domestic arms industry to meet Ukrainian or European demand in the event of a larger conflict. This fact utterly terrifies Russia, as the arsenal of democracy could sprout up practically overnight if Germany chose to do so. Because of these two factors, Russia's tried to subvert German support for Ukraine in earnest since February of last year. The first way the Russians tried to do this was with energy supplies. As some Russian commentators have put it, Russia's only real economic value to the world is that it's a giant gas station. With seemingly unlimited reserves of crude oil and natural gas, Russia is one of the primary suppliers of petroleum and national gas to Europe before the invasion. Almost as soon as the invasion started, various European politicians started voicing their concerns that Russia could weaponize energy in response to economic sanctions or aid provided to Ukraine. The Russian hope was that by threatening the quality of life of everyday Europeans, they would pressure their governments to not support Ukraine, and it worked for a time. Because of these fears, some European countries held back from providing lethal aid to Ukraine, including Germany. But of course, as the world saw that Ukraine would not only survive, but more than likely win this war, support from populations more concerned about keeping the lights on rather than Ukrainian sovereignty began to falter. This, of course, angered Russia, and they began weaponizing energy resources in earnest. Between demanding payment in rubles to threatening to slow down or outright cut off European oil and natural gas supplies, Russia started bullying Europe to bow to its demands. These scare tactics did not work, and Russia began to carry out its own kind of sanctions last summer when it started significantly reducing oil and natural gas in some European countries. Among the hardest hit was Germany. Prior to the invasion, Germany received about half of its fuel and over a third of its natural gas from Russia. When Russia started to cut off German energy supplies, the German government began scrambling to replace lost supplies. Over the next 6 months, Germany began to almost entirely free itself from Russian energy. From building several new natural gas terminals, establishing new contracts with the US and the Middle East, creating a new phased ration system, bringing back coal-fired plants, and extending the life of its nuclear power plants, Germany has now made itself independent from Russian energy. However, there were still some hardships before Germany reached this point. Electricity prices hit nearly a 40-year high in the country, and natural gas prices increased exponentially, especially after the mysterious Nord Stream 2 explosion. But despite these temporary hardships, Germany pulled off what most of the world, including Russia, thought was impossible, especially in the timeline that Germany did it. With Russia unable to bully Germany via its energy resources, it knew it had to try something else, and they were already running out of time. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz promised to invest 100 billion euros into the German military and arms industry despite Russian energy manipulation tactics. Because of this, the Russians began to undermine German support via other means. This time, the strategy was an audacious one, uniting the far left and the far right of Germany into one unified front. But how could these two polar opposites attract, and how has Russia been accomplishing this? In Germany, there are several mainstream political parties, but among the most popular are the Social Democrats, which is the party of the current Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But just like in the US, there are a variety of fringe parties on both sides of the spectrum. On the far right is the Alternative for Germany party, known as the AfD. The AfD has been around since 2013 and espouses your bog-standard variety of right-wing politics, including being staunchly anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT, jingoist, and ultra-nationalist. On the other side of the political spectrum is the extreme left party known as Die Linke, or the Left in Germany. The Left Party has been around since the early 2000s and whose views are described by some as being more center-left, with a fringe group inside who are very left-wing. There's a small group within the party that supports policies such as wanting to put a ban on private companies, extreme anti-monopoly laws, and the refusal to deploy German troops anywhere outside German borders for any reason. Though the viewpoints of these two extremes would make it seem like these two parties are incompatible working with one another, they do have one major thing in common: there are small minorities in both parties that support Russia. The AfD likes Russia because they see much of themselves in Putin and his ideology. Like Putin, the AfD wants to restore Germany to its former glory by taking back the negative connotations the German public has associated with nationalism, kind of like a Make Germany Great Again movement. The AfD also staunchly is anti-immigrant and wants nothing more than to see all the non-Christian minorities expelled from Germany, or at least make it so they're not treated as equally as German citizens, similar to what Putin does with ethnic minorities in Russia. The party's also staunchly against the LGBT community and sees laws passed by Putin essentially criminalizing these already marginalized groups as sound domestic policy. They also echo Putin's line that Russia was defending itself from the expansion of NATO. The Left Party has a very vocal minority that supports Russia because they buy into his propaganda that Germany is a puppet of NATO and, by extension, the US. They firmly advocate for removing all foreign troops from German soil and for Germany to back out of any military alliance, including NATO. Not only that, but a fraction of the party sympathizes with Russia due to their communist leanings. They would like to personally see a revival of the old Soviet Union in some way, and supporting Putin in their minds is the best way to achieve that goal. So even though it might seem highly unlikely at first, the far right and far left in Germany actually have some very solid ground in their support for Russia, and unfortunately their views are starting to become more common. While both these groups are on the fringes of the political spectrum, their support for Russia is not. Shortly before the war, German support for Russia still stood around a third of the country. While these numbers have decreased somewhat, it's estimated that just under 25% of Germans still support Russia. Why so many Germans support Russia despite being in a free and capitalist economy can be explained by the decades of Soviet occupation in Eastern Germany. When looking at political maps of German election results, both AfD and the left's strongest support bases are still in areas of Germany formerly occupied by the USSR. Several generations of Germans were indoctrinated in the Russian way of doing business, and even after 30 years of the reunification of Germany, there's still a strong minority within Germany with a soft spot for Putin and his style of government. Russia has attempted to capitalize on this through an aggressive campaign of support for fringe politicians in Germany. With the current state of government, just over half the country supports the current coalition. The AfD and Left Party are among the two strongest contenders among the opposition parties. Because of this, it's only natural for Russia to single them out to begin sowing dissent in the German public. According to leaked Russian documents that multiple Western intelligence agencies have confirmed as authentic, Russia began planning its German campaign in July 2022, shortly after reducing energy supplies to the country. During this meeting, Kremlin officials decided that the German information space was the most crucial in this effort. With their marching orders in hand, Russian officials began to expand upon existing relationships with German politicians and cultivate new ones. The secret documents propose that Russia should try several angles at sowing dissent. The one deemed to have the most chance of success would be supporting German politician Sarah Wagenknecht. Wagenknecht is a member of the Left Party and has been growing in popularity over the years. In recent years, she's clashed with the traditional members of the Left Party over their views on traditional family values, immigration, and other social policies. While Wagenknecht is still very liberal in regard to foreign policy and economics, she harbors many of the same viewpoints as the AfD does toward their other issues. Because of this, she's also been openly debating about creating a new political party, and estimates range that if she did so, she would garner up to 24% of German voters. The Kremlin believe that supporting her in her bid to create a new party should be their main focus. However, when Wagenknecht was questioned about whether or not she had been in contact with Russian intelligence agents, she categorically denied these claims. When asked whether she would seek an alliance with the AfD, she also denied those claims. But while little evidence has surfaced suggesting her Russian connection, her pro-Russian tone has become more pro-Putin since last year. On the eve of the Russian invasion, Wagenknecht made several talk show appearances supporting Putin. During one of those talk shows, she famously said of Putin, "We can be very glad that Putin is not what he is portrayed. A crazy nationalist who gets drunk on pushing borders." Of course, that is precisely what he is, and she later admitted to being wrong about the invasion. But over the next 6 months after the Kremlin documents point to the start of their plan to unite the left and right, she began making even more comments supporting Russia. Between September and December of last year, she repeatedly stated that Germany was making the wrong decision by placing sanctions on their most important energy partner. During later rallies, she advocated for a total ban on any further weapons exports to Ukraine and an immediate ceasefire among the current line of control. Though she denies close contact with Russia, her ex-husband Ralph Niemeyer has told a very different story. He claims he is almost in daily contact with Russian officials and that the Kremlin is very interested in seeing his ex-wife unite the two fringe groups. He claims that though she would love to see this happen, she cannot allow herself to take even one penny of Russian money lest it comes back to haunt her in the future, as it did French politician Marine Le Pen, who lost a bid for French presidency over a similar scandal. Because of this, he speculates she is likely getting guidance from Russian handlers but cannot get more direct support that could leave a paper trail. But some other German politicians are less concerned about their image. Unlike his ex-wife, Niemeyer and several dozen officials have been openly courted by Kremlin cronies. For example, even before the full-scale invasion, AfD members went on all expenses-paid trips to Russia for what they claimed were political or economic conferences. During those trips, and in more recent ones, the leaked documents show huge bills for extravagant hotels, expensive theater tickets, restaurant tabs, and all the works thanks to Russian taxpayers. However, after the invasion started and it suddenly became taboo to be associated with Russia, the majority of AfD members started traveling to Russia and Belarus in secret. One of the more famous examples of these trips was a secret trip in September of last year when media pundits found out and blew the whistle on it. The trip was supposed to be a high-profile trip to illegally occupied regions of the Donbass, in what was sure to be a guilt trip to show just how horrible the Ukrainians were and how Russia was a victim in all this. Of course, when the German media found out about the trip, the AfD lawmakers immediately returned to Germany without making their pilgrimage to occupied Ukraine. Despite many AfD leaders wanting to keep their Russian connections on the down low, some prefer to make their Russian trips out in the open. Arguably one of the most famous of these lawmakers is Niemeyer himself. Once the Russian invasion kicked off, he created a self-described German government in exile and has been meeting with Russian officials regularly in public to make deals on behalf of the actual German government. Though Niemeyer has zero power or authority to do anything, he insists he is doing the work that no one in Germany wants to do. Among his accomplishments was getting a new contract proposal for sending more gas to Germany through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and presenting it to the Chancellor's office. Acts like those prove Russia's ulterior motives in the pipeline explosion and that they're using German puppets to do their bidding in the country. However, Russian influence extends far beyond just the top echelon of fringe parties. Russian propagandists are trying to make their efforts more legitimate and homegrown by helping plan and organize pro-Russian rallies throughout Germany. Even from the beginning of the Russian influence campaign, the Kremlin mobilized its army of Russian trolls to develop pro-Russian stories and slogans along with spreading misinformation on various social media sites. For example, they wrote a series of slogans and cartoons to be published or spread by AfD members, including things like "Buy gas, not war," and "Ukraine wants war, Germany wants peace." But due to Germany's ability to wean itself off of Russian energy so quickly, slogans like these were not particularly effective. In addition, the Kremlin had plans to pay party members to spray graffiti around the country with anti-Ukraine and pro-Russian messages. These acts of vandalism would then be photographed and sent to the media. The purpose of this was to make it appear that support for Russia was more prevalent in German society than previously thought by having this graffiti pop up everywhere, when in all reality it was going to be highly mobile paid actors spreading these messages. But just like many of their great ideas, this plan did not work out either. Perhaps the only thing that has worked out in Russia's favor has been their planning of protests and demonstrations around the country. These documents revealed that Russia keeps a close count of the turnout and messaging for every pro-Russian rally in Germany. These rallies or protests are sometimes initiated by Russian handlers who direct protest leaders on what to say and when to execute their demonstrations. But despite this direct Russian interference, the AfD is clearly conflicted about larger Russian support. While many in the AfD welcome Russia with open arms, many are also skeptical. AfD members in this other camp are cautious about too much support for Russia, since though it would win more support in the east of the country, it would all but eliminate support elsewhere. Because the AfD has aspirations to one day control the German government, the party's long-term goals are to refrain from officially endorsing or espousing Russian support party-wide and remain palatable for most Germans. Though there will always be rogue elements of the AfD like Niemeyer, the numbers speak for themselves. Of the several hundred AfD members currently holding some type of office, just a few dozen members are known or suspected to have close Russian ties. So even with this party having the most open support for Russia, only about 10% of its members have any real Russian influence. Even though Russia's campaign to unite the right and the left thus far can be described as an abject failure, its best tactic yet has been the disinformation campaign about Germany. Before and since the full-scale invasion, Germany has been the prime target for Russian disinformation in Europe. No other European country comes close to the amount of misleading, fabricated, or outright false news and social media stories than what Russia makes against Germany. The disinformation campaign has its roots around the time of the Syrian refugee crisis. Russian troll farms created fake media stories about atrocities and crimes committed by Muslim refugees that various media outlets and German police confirmed as false. Russia was doing this to influence German opinion to share the hardline Russian stance on immigration. This media campaign has continued over the years, and Germany is attacked almost daily at this point, where media outlets and various government organizations have had to disprove Russian propaganda. One of the most recent examples was Russian media claiming German citizens waved the Soviet flag over the Bundestag building to celebrate the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany. Bundestag representatives and Berlin police both confirmed no one has ever done this, not now or in the past, and the videos were clearly fake. Other recent instances include Russian media claiming that Germany is in fact abducting Ukrainian children and bringing them to Germany. One of their media posts suggests in recent weeks 79 children have been abducted by adoption agencies to be illegally adopted by German parents. While this is certainly true of what Russia has been doing, the German police and various adoption and foster care agencies pointed out this has never happened even once, much less in 79 cases reported by these Russian trolls. Russian propagandists also conducted poor attempts at revisionist history, such as claiming the infamous Katyn massacre, a secret NKVD operation to murder captured Polish army officers and political elite, was a false flag operation committed by the Nazis. Of course, history has shown this is false, but Russia continues to deny responsibility for crimes it committed 80 years ago, much less today. Another example of revisionist history Russia pushes is that they claim Zelensky and his family had ties to fascist Ukrainian collaborators in World War II. Despite President Zelensky's family actually being persecuted by the Nazis, with several close relatives who were murdered, the Russians claim he is a direct descendant of surviving Ukrainian Nazis. Another common narrative Russia tries to push is that Germany is a vassal state of the United States. They claim that countries like Germany have foregone their sovereignty in exchange for American money and arms. This, of course, could not be further from the truth. Any country with U.S. troops has formal agreements with that host nation. For example, despite the U.S. presence on Japanese soil since World War II, the U.S. and Japanese governments regularly exchange a two-way dialogue about the status of forces, quantity, location of bases, and other issues. This is no different than in countries like Germany, which hosts the bulk of European-based American service members. Claims like these only serve to appease the minority of Germans who want all U.S. troops to leave the country, which, of course, would serve the Russian military well, since Germany is a huge supply hub for Western aid that flows into Ukraine. But despite this relentless media campaign, it's clear that most Germans see through these amateurish attempts at influencing their opinions. Even the most pro-Russian AfD or Die Linke lawmakers also realize that their views are on the fringe, and that they must choose whether to support Russia or seek greater public support for their parties. Because of this, the Russian misinformation campaign will likely go just about as well as their invasion of Ukraine. This is because since it started last summer, Germany has weaned itself off Russian energy, provided Leopard tanks and other advanced weapon systems to Ukraine, and had a pro-Ukraine defense minister appointed, all of which proves Russia's plans are once again an abject failure. Want to know how Germany would fare if the war escalated? Check out Germany's World War III plan, or watch World War III Most Likely Things That Will Cause It for a look at some worst-case scenarios.